Well, our reading again is in 2 Chronicles and chapter 29. We're going to read from verse number 4 of 2 Chronicles chapter 29 concerning Hezekiah. Verse number 4, and he brought in the priests and the Levites and gathered them together into the east street. The Revised Version says that it was a broad street towards the east, and said unto them, Hear me, ye Levites, sanctify now yourselves, and sanctify the house of the Lord God of your fathers, and carry forth the filthiness out of the holy place. For our fathers have trespassed and done that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord our God, and have forsaken him, and have turned away their faces from the habitation of the Lord, and turned their backs. Also they have shut up the doors of the porch, and put out the lamps, and have not burned incense, nor offered burnt offerings in the holy place unto the God of Israel. Wherefore the wrath of the Lord was upon Judah and Jerusalem, and he delivered them to trouble, to astonishment, and to hissing, as you see with your eyes. Now further down to verse number 11. Now this is Hezekiah speaking to the Levites. My sons, be not now negligent, for the Lord hath chosen you to stand before him to serve him, and that you should minister unto him and burn incense. Then we have the names of 14 of these Levites. Then the Levites arose, Mahath the son of Amasai, and Joel the son of Azariah, of the sons of Kohath, and so on. Now down to verse number 15. And they gathered their brethren and sanctified themselves, and came according to the commandment of the king by the word of the Lord to cleanse the house of the Lord. And the priests went into the inner part of the house of the Lord to cleanse it, and to bring out all the uncleanness that they had found in the temple of the Lord into the court of the house of the Lord. And the Levites took it to carry it out abroad and into the brook Kidron. Now they began on the first day of the first month to sanctify, and on the 8th day of the month came they to the porch of the Lord. So they sanctified the house of the Lord in 8 days. And on the 16th day of the first month they made an end. Then they went into Hezekiah the king, and said, We have cleansed all the house of the Lord, and the altar of burnt offering with all the vessels thereof, and the showbread table with all the vessels. Now down please to verse number 25, if you have a Bible. And he set the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, with psalteries, and with harps, according to the commandment of David, and of Gad, the king's seer, and Nathan the prophet, for so was the commandment of the Lord by his prophets. And the Levites stood with the instruments of David, and the priests with the trumpets. And Hezekiah commanded to offer the burnt offering upon the altar. Now this is a lovely little part of a verse here. And when the burnt offering began, the song of the Lord began also, with the trumpets, with the instruments ordained by David, king of Israel. And all the congregation worshipped, and the singers sang, and the trumpeters sounded, and all this continued until the burnt offering was finished. And when they had made an end of offering, the king and all that were present with him bowed themselves on worship. Moreover, Hezekiah the king and the princes commanded the Levites to sing praise unto the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer, and they sang praises with gladness, and they bowed their heads on worship. Now, one last reading from verse number 34. Verse 34. But the priests were too few, as they could not slay all the burnt offerings. You see, there were 600 oxen and 3,000 sheep for burnt offerings, and the priests were too few, and they could not slay or skin all the burnt offerings. Were their brethren Levites that helped them till the work was ended. and until the other priests had sanctified themselves. For the Levites were more upright in heart to sanctify themselves than the priests. Now the Lord will bless to us this lovely reading from his precious word. Now there's 4 chapters in 2 Chronicles that cover this King Hezekiah and his reign. And 3 of them, chapter 29, 30, 31, have all got to do with the temple ritual, all of it. We have the temple, the Levites, the priests, we have the offerings, and of course we have the Passover. And then whenever you come to chapter 32, the history is a historical section. And the 3 interesting things in the history of this man, Hezekiah, are dealt with there. His dealings with Sennacherib at the invasion, and also his sickness and how he prayed, and also how he let the visitors from Babylon see all the treasures of his house. So therefore the emphasis is upon the temple. And what I'm interested in just now in this chapter is the Levites. So I've read all about the Levites in this chapter. Quite a bit of readings as it is, but nevertheless very necessary. Now, just to put you in the way concerning these Levites, who were they now? Well, you know that this man, Jacob, the beginning, married a girl called Rachel and her sister Leah. And Leah was more loved than, Rachel was more loved than Leah. So therefore God didn't like this, and so he blessed Leah, and she had a son. Then she had another son, first Reuben, then Simeon, and then Levi was born. And she turned round Leah and she called him Levi, which means joined together, a fellowship. And she says, now maybe my husband will be more reconciled to me now that I've borne him a 3rd son. Then another son after that, Judah, and his name, of course, was Praise. Now, they became one of the tribes, of course, that we have later on, and we see, but unfortunately, before they became great tribes, Levi and Simeon did something dreadful. They went into the tents of the men of Shechem, who had circumcised themselves, and while they were all weak and sick, they slaughtered them with a sword, insomuch that they were cursed by Jacob in Genesis 49. So poor Simeon, and you never hear much about him after that, and Levi were set aside, as it were, because they had slain in their anger, and the instruments of cruelty were in their tents, that is, the swords. They used the swords upon strangers. Very bad testimony. But then by and by they became into Egypt, and they became a tribe, the tribe of Levi. And whenever they come out of Egypt, of course, all those 12 tribes, you see that God did something very interesting. He did 2 things. First of all, he separated the Levites from the rest of the family. And he did this because, well, in chapter 32 of the book of Exodus, while Moses was up on the mount receiving the law and having wonderful communion with the God of heaven, upon the earth and at the foot of the mount, this man Aaron and all the people, they turned to idolatry and made the golden calf. And whenever Moses came down and saw this, he was very angry. And he said, "Who's on the Lord's side?" And the tribe of Levi came up and said, "We're on the Lord's side." And so they were on the Lord's side, and they slew their brethren. And if you want to see about this, you read it, of course, here in Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse number 8. This is Moses blessing the tribes. And of Levi he said, "Let thy Thummim and the Urim be with the Holy One, whom thou didst prove at Massah, and with whom thou didst strive at the waters of Meribah, who said to his father and to his mother, I have not seen him. Neither did he acknowledge his brethren, nor knew his children, for they observed the word of the Lord and kept his covenant. They shall teach Jacob thy judgments. That's the priest's work. And Israel thy law. And they shall put incense before thee on whole burnt sacrifices upon thine altar. Bless, Lord, his substance, and accept the work of his hands. Smite through the loins of them that rise up against him, and of them that hate him, that they rise not again. And so God blessed this tribe of Levi very, very much. And so what he did was he chose them to himself, because God demanded the first fruits. And whenever Israel were in the land, all the first fruits went to God, everything. But also the first fruits of their family. And God did something. Instead of taking the first child or the first son in every family to be his and separate them from their family, he took the tribe of Levi instead. And so the tribe of Levi were chosen by the Lord. And they were a very special people. And you can see that, of course, whenever you come to Deuteronomy 33, as they're blessed in this way. And it's wonderful how that they did not recognize their father, their mother, their children, their brethren. God come first. So God chose them. They're the very people that God wanted. They had proved themselves. First of all, they had failed. They acted in the flesh. But the flesh always comes before the things of the Spirit. And first of all, that which is natural, and then that which is spiritual. That's what we have in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And then a very interesting thing, therefore, whenever they came into the land, they had no inheritance. They had no lands. They had no houses or anything, because the Lord was their portion. And they had a spiritual portion, as it were. Everybody else had a material portion. Of course, God looked after their welfare. And they had some houses that they got lent, of course. They were lent them. And they had fields that were lent them. They didn't own them, but they were lent them to live in, and so on. And God provided for them. Now, these Levites, therefore, became the temple people. And they were the people of the tabernacle. And you know that in the wilderness, they were the very ones who took down the tabernacle and who carried it forward and put it up again on all the vessels. Now, you can see in a sense that they did all the work. And all the rest of the camp watched them and marched after them. But they were carrying, the sons of Kohath were carrying all the vessels of the tabernacle. Some of them were very heavy. And they were carrying them on their shoulders through the wilderness from place to place. You see that others, the sons of Gershon, they had boards on the pillars, and they were huge and heavy to carry. And Merari carried all the curtains that were used in the tabernacle, the four curtain, the covering, and so on, and also the whole court round about, and all these things. They had a lot of work to do, you know. As a matter of fact, they could say maybe to themselves, we are slaves. Now, there's quite a bit about slaves at the minute, and they're trying to wipe out history and so on, and that's all right if they feel like that. But here God took them to himself, but they did it. Not so much because they were slaves, but they were chosen by God. And they were purchased by God. And they did it out of love to God, out of love to the Lord. And so these men were dedicated men. That's the Levites. Now, what does that do with us in the New Testament whenever we come to it? What is the answer to the Levites? Well, you know, all the people of God were divided into three classes. There was, first of all, the priests. Now, they were Levites. So there's the family of the priest, Aaron. And then there's the Levites. And then there's the people. So there's the people, and there's a large company, and there's the Levites, and there was the priests. But let me tell you, the Levites were there for the people, and the priests were there for the people. And whenever you come to Philippian epistle, the Apostle Paul writes, he writes to the overseers, the deacons, and the saints. Well, the saints are put first. He writes to the saints, the overseers, and the deacons. In other words, the deacon was there for the saints, the servant, and the overseer was there for the saints. So these men have the great privilege of being there for the people of God, to serve them and to serve God in this capacity. Now come along to Mark's gospel. Now Mark is the gospel of the servant. I'll put it a better way. Mark's gospel is the gospel of the Levite. For there you see the Lord Jesus as the servant of Jehovah, and he's serving God just like the Levite. And he has no rest, he carries burdens, and he's working from the early morning till late at night, and he's praying. Very often he prays in Mark's gospel. That is the Levite gospel. You come along to Luke's gospel, and that's the priestly gospel. The priestly gospel is there in Luke, and it's the gospel of the priest right throughout. It begins with the temple, ends with the temple. Jerusalem is mentioned more times in Luke than all the gospels put together, for the pure and simple reason that the temple was there. It's filled with temple scenes from beginning to end. The Lord functions as a priest, having compassion on the ignorant and them that were out of the way. Of course, we have the King, and that is Matthew's gospel, and the Son of God, which is John's gospel. But those other serving gospels, the priest and the Levite, you can see them in those two gospels. Now we come over to 1 Peter. And Peter is based on the tabernacle and the wilderness. He's a very clever man with that. He was good at the Psalms too, you know. He made a great study of the Psalms. Comes out on all his sermons and in his letter. Now this man, do you know what he talks about in chapter 1 of that wonderful gospel, or our little epistle of his, chapter 1? He talks about the Levites. And he talks about girding up the loins of your mind. And the Levite girded up the loins to serve. Well, Peter's saying the very same thing. Gird up the loins of your mind. Get this mind set that they're here to serve the Lord. And then he uses the very language that's used of the Levites. Be ye holy, for I am holy. And if you're going to serve me, you must be sanctified. You must be holy. So therefore, he's speaking to all the people of God. So therefore, we're all Levites, every one of us. Every child of God is a Levite. And then Peter leaves that there, and in chapter 2, he comes to the priest. And he talks about the fact that there's a whole building of priests. As a matter of fact, every stone in the building, every believer is a priest, where we can go in before God and we can worship as priests. And you know, we are our holy priesthood, our royal priesthood, and the holy priesthood goes into God to worship, and the royal priesthood comes out to show forth the praises of him who's called it out of darkness into his light. And then he says something, isn't he? Which at one time were not a people, but are now the people of God. So now we're people, the people of God. So the Apostle Peter says, let me tell you now, when the camp of Israel was there was people called Levites, and there were servants. But we're all Levites. And there was people that were the priests, that were the family of the priests. But we're all priests. And he says there was people there that were called the people of God, who got all the privileges and blessings. We are all the people of God. So therefore the Apostle Peter is saying, we are not divided like they were in Israel, where there was Levites and priests and people. We are Levites because we serve the Lord. And we are priests because we can go in and pray and worship. And we're the people of God because we stand in testimony against that world outside, which is contrary to God. So therefore the priests were very, very important people. Now we come to this wonderful section of 2 Chronicles chapter 29. And look, the big part of it is given to the Levites in this wonderful way. A good part of the chapter. Not so much about them in the next chapter, a wee bit here and there, but in this chapter, very, very much. Now look at these. First of all, you can see that the Levites are spoken to by this man, Hezekiah. And he speaks to them very, very beautifully here. He says, now, I want you with the priest to cleanse the house of God. I want you to cleanse it. And he says, you know, the way you cleanse it is just simply like this. the priests were not, the Levites were not allowed to go into the holiest of all. But the priests were on the holy place. The Levites' work was outside on carrying, putting down, taking down the tabernacle and putting it up again and carrying it forward, transporting it. They were transporters. That's what they were. So the priests did their work, and they went into the temple and brought out all the filthiness, the abominations, idolatry that was in the temple, and they brought it out to the porch of the court. And then the Levites carried it. I like that. They carried it away to the river Kidron and threw it into the Kidron so it was all washed away. In other words, they carry things. And as they carried the vessels of the Lord, so they carried away in a sanctified way everything that was contrary to the church, the building, the temple, which was the assembly. They carried it all away. And that's all our duty. Every one of us as Levites. But to do this, they sanctified themselves. The priests sanctified themselves, but the Levites sanctified themselves. Because you must say it like this: anyone that carries the vessels of the Lord must be holy. As Isaiah pointed out, be ye holy that bear the vessels of the Lord. And we're going to handle holy things like the ark. Now, it was covered, of course, like the ark, on the table of showbread, on the lampstand, on all these things. They're going to handle holy things on the boards, on the pillars, on the curtains. No, they must be holy, a sanctified people. So therefore they sanctified themselves. In other words, they consecrated themselves. Sanctification and consecration are something similar, and people would say, well, it's the same thing. But there's a wee difference. Consecration is that God has chosen you for a service, for a place. You're consecrated to God. That comes out on the offerings. The ram is the ram of consecration. And it says, I'm the Lord. I'm for the Lord. I'm here for the Lord. For whatever the Lord wants me to do, wherever he wants to place me. That was a Levite. But as well as that, he was sanctified. In other words, he kept himself clean. And he confessed anything and put away anything that was contrary to the law of God. It's like, well, we're like those Levites sanctifying themselves whenever we come to 1 John chapter 1, that we confess our sins and then we're forgiven them. And so we're still in the place to serve the Lord in that way. Now, could I say that these very interesting Levites were broken up into three families? There was the Kohathites, the men of Kohath. And the old brethren used to teach us, and it was lovely. Don't hear so much about it now. They were the ones who carried the vessels of the Lord. Then we had the sons of Gershom, and they carried the boards and the pillars. And then we have the Merarites, and they carried all the curtains. Now, the order in which they marched was just like that. That's the order in which they marched. First of all, along come the men with all the wonderful vessels of the Lord, the Kohathites. But there was somebody there before them. Gershon was there. And they put up the boards of the tabernacle and everything else. And then they brought the vessels all in. Kohath. And then along came the Merarites with all the curtain and everything. And they covered the whole thing up. It's for the eyes of God and for God's people, not to the world outside. And they covered everything up in that lovely way. And here's what the old brethren used to teach us. They said, the sons of Kohath, let me tell you, they were the teachers. A little picture of a teacher handling these vessels, handling the ark. Oh, that's the greatest teaching that we have. On the altar, burnt offering outside, one inside, one outside. On another altar, the incense altar inside. Why, the ark tells us of who God is. On the altar tells us of what he has done. The altar burnt offering, the cross. And the incense altar tells us where he is. He's interceding for us as our great high priest inside the veil. And all these vessels, you see, and this is wonderful teaching, like the Hebrew epistle on the book of the Revelation too, I may say, which was based upon the tabernacle. And then the evangelist comes along, you see, and they're carrying all the boards and the pillars, and they're going to plant them in the desert. Those boards are going to be planted there, standing upright. 20 of them this way and 20 of them that way, and so on. And that's the work of the evangelist, to go out and get people saved and plant them. Now it's God that plants them. Every tree which my Father has not planted shall be rooted up. So you see, it's God that does the planting. And I have planted, says the Apostle Paul, the assembly, but when it's a question of souls, it's only God can do that. And so we have this wonderful planting. This is the work of the evangelist. And then we have Merari coming with all the curtains to cover it all up and to preserve it from the elements outside, from the rain and the frost and everything else, and to keep everything covered up. And so that is the pastor who holds everything together. That's the overseer. That's the way it is. And so here, first of all, this wonderful man, Hezekiah, he gets these Levites and he says, now you're going to do a great work here, and they sanctify themselves. And then he speaks with great encouragement to them. And he says, my sons, there's affection here. He's not lording over them as a king could, you know, but he's not doing that. He calls them my sons. Well, God looks upon the Levites with great love, and that's all of us. But it's in that part of that thing that we do is to serve. We maybe serve in the government of the assembly, or we serve in the ministry, or we serve in the gospel, or we serve no matter what we do. It's either Godward, saintward, or manward. All that is the Levite, and we're all Levites, every one. Because in the scripture we're called bond servants or bond slaves. That we're slaves in a sense, but we're purchased by the blood of Christ. And we work far harder for the devil as the slaves. Slaves of sin and of Satan. Couldn't break the vices that were there with many, many people, but were delivered for it all. And then God took us for his own. So that we're the firstborn amongst others, as it were, amongst the firstborn. And it's lovely to see that the Lord looks upon us with affection and has consecrated every child of God, consecrated to himself to be his servant in some capacity, even if it's only giving out the hymn books at the door, or cleaning a hall, or giving out gospel tracts, or taking the Bible reading, or preaching the gospel, or ministering meetings, or arranging everything. We're all Levites, every one of us. We're bond slaves, and we do it out of love to the master. We love our master, as the slave said, the Hebrew slave, and I will not go. And so these Levites were wonderful people. So, my son, be not negligent of your duty now. Oh, that's a very, very good word for us, because we can neglect the things that we ought to do. We can neglect our duty. There's a lot of people could preach the gospel very, very well, very soundly, but they don't do much of it. And there are people that are very, very clever at certain things, but all that cleverness and all that brain work, it goes outside for other things, but not for the Lord. And of course, there's a lot of people could pray, and they don't pray. And there's so many things that we can do, because we're Levites, we're servants, we're there to serve. That's what we're there for. And he says, be not negligent of this. Paul had to tell Timothy, neglect not the gift that is in thee. You don't neglect that. The Hebrew people neglect not the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. Some of them are stopped going to the meetings. And that's how Paul, or the writer, knew that there was something wrong, because they stopped going to the meetings. And so you see, we have a great duty, and this man encourages them, and he reminds them of their calling. You're chosen of God. Such a wonderful thing. Angels can't do that. Angels can do many, many things, but they can't do what believers are called upon to do. They minister to us, but they can't minister in the way we can. An angel can't preach the gospel. Indeed, he cannot. He's not allowed to do that because he hasn't experienced redemption. And so it's all these wonderful things that God has committed into our hands. And he reminds us how God chose you. And he made choice of us from the very moment that he saved us, maybe before that again. And the purpose is to stand before him. That's what it says here in this wonderful chapter, to stand before him. And standing is always the thing of a servant. You see that Abraham, chapter 18 of Genesis, here's three visitors, they're heavenly. He didn't know that at the first, he knew it later on. They're heavenly. And what did he do? He made a feast for them. He made them something. And then he stood and waited. He waited as a servant. He waits. Is there anything more they need? And then he comes to their attention right away. That's why they're called waiters in the hotels, you know. The servants, they're called waiters. They're waiting upon you to see, is there anything that's necessary, anything that's needed? And then he says to minister and to serve him. And then to burn incense, to praise God and glorify God. Such a calling. And everything we do just glorifies God in this wonderful, wonderful way. Now you can see the wisdom of Hezekiah and all this. He uses the Levites so that it could function for the priest and for the people. The Levites were scattered all over the place, and he gathered them together in a broad place here, where there was room for them to do the service and everything else. And it was to the east, and the east is before the Lord. And the east street is really a broad place towards the east to do the work of God. And that's an interesting thing that we serve. But we must always remember we serve God. And it's God that really assesses our service and not men. Men may praise you or they may neglect to praise you. You may think you don't get credit for what you do. And there's other men get praised maybe because they're favorites and so on. But the Apostle Paul looked for the praise of the Lord. And he did everything before the Lord. Paul tells you in two sections in the scriptures how that he behaved himself as an evangelist when he was preaching the gospel. One of them is in 1 Corinthians now, but there's one in 1 Thessalonians chapter number 2. And there, that's for the evangelist. And you look at this wonderful chapter, and Paul says how he went about when he was preaching to the people of Thessalonica, how he went about it. And he says he did this. He says, God is witness. And he did this again. The Lord knows. And he did this before the Lord. And in other words, he was doing all this work amongst the Thessalonians, but he knew that God was surveying the whole thing. And that God is watching our service and watching our work. And therefore, you know, if we realize that God is scrutinizing my little service in the assembly, or whatever it is, that God is assessing it, I tell you, we would do it more earnestly. And we put everything we have into it and give it priority. And that's what this man Hezekiah is doing with these people. And he says, you know, haste, no delay. And you know, they cleansed the house in 8 days. As you know, the number 8 is a new beginning in Scripture. 7 days and then a new week. Number 8 is always the beginning of a new thing. And so therefore, they began then, they were able to do their service. All that sanctification had to be done, and it cleansed the house of the Lord. Then they were able to do that service. Then there's other things come out here. There's these names, these Levites, and you can see that there's 14 names in 7 pairs. It's interesting that they're in pairs. You know, whenever Matthew's gospel, look at them sending out the apostles, they were sent out in pairs. And you get that in one of the other gospels too, that they're sent out in pairs to be company one for the other. And what the one couldn't do, the other could do. And what this couldn't do, the other one could do. And so they were worked in pairs in this way, and that's what we have here. I haven't time to go into it, but the meaning of these names is very, very interesting, lovely. And you can see here, if you look at it, you can see that there's the sons of Kohath, and Mahath means to snatch. That's lovely. To snatch these things, to hold them, to cling to them, because they're sacred to God, you know. And the strength of Jehovah, Amasai, the strength of Jehovah. You see that they've all significance here, but we haven't the time to go into that. And so that's what they did. They sanctified themselves in this lovely way. But another thing, it's introduced here, and it's a lovely thing, and that was that they had musical instruments. I like that. And that comes out here down towards the end. That is lovely. Musical instruments. Now, I'm not saying we should have abandoned the assembly. These musical instruments, of course, are symbolic. The symbols. And these Levites were to handle the symbols. And they crash things together with a crescendo, you know. And it means praise, intense praise. I wonder, have we ever experienced that? You're going to see it in Revelation chapter number 4. Those 4 living creatures, those 24 elders, praising God for creation. And again in chapter number 5, praising God for salvation, God's 2 great works. And this was praising God, and they ceased not from praising God. And so the symbols would tell us how that we put all our strength and energy into praising the Lord. And then it's interesting see that the psalteries is a 10-string instrument, and it's plucked with the fingers. With the fingers. Yeah. If you're going to play an instrument like the piano or anything, you use your fingers. And it speaks of skill, the fingers. And you can read about David, you know, he led the people skillfully with his fingers and all these wonderful things. And David, Moses, and so on. And how that the fingers always speak of skill. And so therefore, you do the things that you're good at. If somebody can do something that nobody else can do, well then, do it, you know. You have a skill that the others don't have. And so on, everything comes up. The harp is a heavenly instrument. Whenever you come to the Revelation, you'll see that coming out. There in chapter 5 of Revelation, there's the living ones, the 24 elders, and they have harps. And I think that's the highest praise. A harp is the language of heaven. And then chapter 14 on Mount Zion, here's these wonderful people with harps, harping with their harps, a new song. They're going into experiences that they've never had before, new things. And then chapter 15, the overcomers in the tribulation, so on, with the harps of God, the harps of God. In other words, God is getting praise. This is the heavenly language. It's lovely to use the language of the heavens. You know, many a time I thought I should go over through the Psalms. I've never done it yet because life's too short. I should go through the Psalms, and every time there's that wonderful section on praise to God, I should memorize those. And then get into the presence of God and just shout them out in the presence of God. That'll be wonderful. That's the Levites for you. And then the priests with the trumpets. And the whole source of this is scriptural. First of all, there are commandments of David the king. You read about all that there in First Chronicles, how that he got all that whole service. It was he that did the whole thing and planned it, and he carried it out during the time of the good kings, not the evil kings. And also of God, the king seer, a prophetic office, and also of Nathan, again linked to David and all those. But the commandment of the Lord, it says in verse 26. So this is the commandment of God. One more wee thing. There's something nice comes out. The priests were too few. Verse 34. To flay all the burnt offerings. So the Levites, they saw to this in verse 15. And look what it says about these Levites. 3 things about them. They were more upright in heart than the priests. Now imagine that. The priest was the very highest office. In other words, their motives was right. Everything was right. They had sanctified themselves outwardly. They were clean and they were fitted. And they shone above the priest. Now look what it says. Now the high priest, they were not equal to their positions, but the Levites were more spiritual than they. Isn't that wonderful? Now here in this chapter, not only do these Levites serve, not only do they serve in all the different capacities, but as well as that, they're sanctified. They're sanctified. And the last thing that's said about them in this chapter, they were more spiritually minded than the priests. You say that the priests were not equal to their position, but you could say that the Levites were more than fit for their position, more even than God required. That's all I'm going to say. Remember, we're all Levites. The Lord Jesus was a Levite. And as long as we have breath, and as long as we have energy, and as long as we have life and a sound mind, we're here to serve the Lord, and through the Lord's people, as long as God gives us strength. Now may the Lord bless his word, and let's pray together.